After 7 years of development, the latest entry of the long-running science adventure series, Anonymous Code, is finally here. I only got into the series a few years back, but it quickly became one that emotionally resonated with me. Thus, while I didn't have the 7 years of built-up excitement as other fans, I did have a lot of personal expectations based on my love for the franchise. So, did it live up to those expectations? Sort of? Upon its conclusion, Anonymous Code was a difficult game to reflect back on. Even when writing this review, I found my thoughts swaying back and forth constantly. In many ways, this game serves as a new chapter for the series, a culmination of the series' sci-fi concepts and themes. At the same time, the title upends plenty of the traditions in SciADV's narrative formula. These changes don't conceptually make Anonymous Code's story better or worse than its predecessor, just different and fresh. Thankfully, most of the deviations are backed up by strong execution. The snappier pacing and kind-hearted protagonist makes for the series' most exhilarating and narratively efficient entry to date. The progression system, despite some of the jank, is the most streamlined and thematically satisfying in the series. All of this is propped up by exceptional music, a stellar dub, and presentation that raises the bar for how Vians can convey their scenes. As a whole, Anonymous Code is a fantastic game that I had an absolute blast playing through despite some of its issues. But it's these issues that lay the groundwork for my conflicted feelings for this title. The lack of room to breathe thanks to the narrative speedrunning to hit all its core plot beats left things feeling rushed during the latter half. It leaves the foundationally strong characters and thematic concepts about challenging our fated future feeling a tad bit undercooked. The execution of its individual parts are strong, it's just when combined together, Anonymous Code feels like a rushed game that's less than the sum of its parts. A great game with missed potential to be amazing. This is why I stressed earlier about my personal expectations. The Science Adventure series is one where each entry left a strong emotional impact on me, and unfortunately, Anonymous Code never quite reaches those character-driven emotional heights. Perhaps this is an unfair expectation to put on it, having my judgment be heavily rooted in my adoration for the series. It's an entry brimming with potential that pushes the series towards a strong new direction that I hope gets improved upon in the future, though ultimately, it's that same potential that I just can't help feel conflicted about despite my enjoyment.
Close the loop. Hack into God.
In the year 2037, protagonist Polon Takaoka and his buddy Cross work as the white hacker group called Nakano Symphonies, going around town stopping cybercrimes. That is, until their daily lives get thrown for a loop when Polon meets Momo, a mysterious individual being chased by the military. Caught in the crossfire, Polon is thrust into a tangled web of conflicts rooted in mystery, conspiracy, and of course, a grab bag of scientific concepts. Uncovering a mystery filled with scientific and supernatural ideas is nothing new for the series, but how Anonymous Code shakes up its standard narrative formula results in the most unconventional entry yet. The hacker quests provided by the unknown character, Cicada 3301, are the primary early story beats that highlights these key differences, propelling the narrative forward at an extremely fast pace, in contrast to the series' traditional slow burn. Quests highlight the tremendous narrative efficiency of the game, tying together world building, plot, and characters all in one fell swoop. Not only is the cyberpunk aesthetic brought to life by its wonderful presentation, but solving the objective of each quest requires our heroes to scour the city, fleshing out the world and the people that inhabit it. It's a natural way to see the various tech used in this futuristic setting, the places folks visit for their leisure, and most importantly, the chaos and panic that ensues when their daily lives are disrupted by the hacker quests. Whether it's trying to stop a plane with hundreds of passengers from crashing into the city, or worldwide verification errors threatening an economic collapse, the objective of each quest has dire consequences on both a local and global scale. The escalation of stakes are also strong, as more obstacles get thrown at the Nakano Symphony's path. As a result, the atmosphere of the city gradually grows from unease to panic as the time to complete each quest dwindles. If things weren't daunting enough, the different opposing forces adds an extra wrinkle of tension in each arc. There's the other hackers trying to get in Polon's way, as they compete to be the first to finish the quest. The law enforcement trying to keep order within the city. The folks of the Gaia Institute trying to get their hands on Momo. And the Holy Office of 513, a religious group who are trying to welcome the end of the world. Having the key players and antagonists interacting right from the get-go sets this title apart from other SciADV entries, which prefers to keep the antagonists in the background until the final stretch. Anonymous Code handles this change well, as the clash between parties adds a variety of conflict to contend with beyond completing each objective, making each quest a thrill to complete, on top of strengthening the world building when these different groups use the city as their battleground. Another benefit of having numerous sub-conflicts is how it provides plenty of high-stakes opportunities to flesh out and push characters in interesting directions, particularly our two leads, Polon Takaoka and Momo Aizaki. This is where Anonymous Code's biggest departure from the series stems from. Every SciADV protagonist is an extremely flawed individual, possessing traits and habits that are intentionally designed to make them unlikable. Polon doesn't really have any of that. He's just a happy-go-lucky kid who wants to do the right thing for others and his community. It's why he was enthused about the opportunity to save the world. At first, I was pretty apprehensive about this change. The problematic traits of each protagonist is the key foundation each entry's story is constructed around. I was trepidatious that Polon would be a generic hero archetype, one who always does the right thing and can never do any wrong. Thankfully, despite his well-meaning actions and intentions, he's not devoid of flaws. It's established early on that while the young hacker does want to help people, he also cares about his pride and self-image. Polon enjoys the idea of being perceived as a cool hero. It causes him to be impulsive, recklessly performing actions based on how he feels with little consideration for the consequences, whether it's proudly displaying his group name on a successful hacking assignment or lying about having a girlfriend to someone who kept pestering him about it, even considering hacking a dating app to rig a match. It establishes nuance within his characterization, avoiding the pitfall of making him a dull character. Even then, these flaws are not the primary traits that make up who Polon is, just small blemishes that set the seed for future growth for a kid who wants to do the right thing.
I'm here to help whoever's in a jam. I always give it my all, no holding back.
Momo, on the other hand, serves as an excellent contrast to Polon. While she shares the same desire to save the world, her background makes it so she's terrified of hurting others in the process. The early arcs of the narrative smartly utilizes Polon's simplistic hero mindset for the purpose of bringing change within Momo. While the impulsive and reckless traits of the young hacker are flaws for him, those same flaws serve as the positive push she needs to develop the confidence to stand up for what she believes in, to not let the fear of her existence harming others overtake her desire to help people. Watching her blossom into someone who is proud of the good she wants to bring to the world was such a delight to see unfold. The different conflicts and quests provide a satisfying opportunity to watch these two support each other, as their bond evolves in a believable way, which is important when the entire story hinges on their dynamic. How the story weaves these two leads with the themes of the game is nothing short of exceptional. Anonymous Code on a thematic level is ambitious, the lengths we go through to defy our own destiny, to carve our own fate, but also the dread we feel about the unknown future, our place and value within it. Do we yearn to redo the past for a better tomorrow, or hope fate has a better tomorrow in store? The concept of the future is far from something new, but the way the narrative weaves its characters and plot points, on top of utilizing past series sci-fi ideas and themes, is stellar. There are revelations that occur during the latter half that had me gasp out loud at how well it ties all the components together, especially the progression system. Early in the game, Polon becomes aware that some higher power, aka us the player, is observing him. This gives him the ability to access the actual in-game save menu, being able to create and load different save files. It's a surreal meta experience seeing a character interact with the menus the player also uses, but the execution is SciADV's best and most streamlined progression system to date. During a quest or high-stakes scenario, the player has the ability to nudge Polon with the trigger buttons to load an earlier save of the world whenever things are looking grim. It gives each conflict a slight puzzle feel to it, testing the player in tense situations to recognize when they should risk pressing on for more information, or loop back. When do we push towards an unknown future, or rectify our past mistakes? Thankfully, Polon will automatically close the menu whenever it's not the contextually right time to loop, alongside giving a context-sensitive clue informing the player whether to wait longer or if the opportunity has already passed. In the case of the latter scenario, the player will reach a game over scene, where the screen will give a hint of what scene to load the menu in. It's a clever system that reduces the excessive and cryptic trial and error of previous root systems. Additionally, the implementation of the save and load mechanic is designed to funnel the player down a singular path, which means replaying the game and grinding for character roots are no longer a thing. This further contributes to the game's faster and efficient pace. That being said, it's still not a perfect system. Finding the right moment to loop is simple enough, but it only works when pressing the triggers at specific lines of dialogue. It's frustrating knowing which scene to load, but not the exact line. Plus, it doesn't make sense from a narrative level. Why does Polon need to hear extra dialogue when all the info was already acquired? Or mope around failing an objective when he can just loop back? There were several points I just mashed the load button at the sections I correctly assumed the trigger would be, treating my ears to a symphony of Polon whining at me.
I'm not giving up. No. Can't agree with that. Stop that for a sec.
Hold on.
I don't get it.
Overall, despite the kinks, it's a stellar system that has an extremely satisfying narrative and thematic payoff towards the end, one that justifies the medium of video games to present its themes about carving our own futures. Unfortunately, while there's so much in anonymous code worth praising, there's a key aspect, or more specifically, a lack of a key aspect, that left me feeling conflicted despite my enjoyment. Unlike previous entries, the story has a severe lack of slice-of-life scenes. I've established how quests are efficient at conveying the necessary story and character beats. However, since they form the bulk of the early and mid-game, the wonderful aspects they bring to the table feel chained solely to the singular narrative device, even in spite the variety each objective provides. The quality is there, but the quantity is a bit much. Anonymous Code's insistence on rapidly jumping from plot point to plot point means there's barely, if any, downtime between each arc to let the events marinate for the characters. There are in-game days, even weeks, that are entirely glossed over simply to progress to the next objective. Time that could be spent seeing the consequences of each quest on the characters' daily lives. What makes Slice of Life a strong narrative tool is how they can be utilized to explore the different facets of a character. How do they respond to different everyday situations? How do they respond to different characters? How do the different characters respond to them? What scenarios and characters bring about exceptions to their most prominent traits? SciADV excels at using these moments to bring to life their flawed protagonists, to fully understand their headspace when conflicts arise, and to see how said conflicts change the way they further engage with their lives. For me, it's what made each protagonist feel so emotionally resonant on a personal level. Even if Polon isn't as flawed as previous characters, both he and Momo are well characterized with the dynamic I bought. But because we primarily see their personalities and bond through the lens of quests, the depiction of their characterization and growth feels restrictive despite how each objective evolves them. I wanted to see more of Polon engaging with the world through his idealistic heroism, when he doesn't have a goal in mind. I wanted to see how each quest shifts his display of optimism when he gets more famous. The scenes that sold me on his character were the few moments of witnessing his infectious joy and hope within his normal life, how the other characters view and are impacted by that optimism in their daily lives. Especially Momo. She is the character who undergoes the most development. Thus, the lack of breaks in the narrative felt like a missed opportunity to dive deep on how her mental state is impacted by each arc. It's a missed opportunity to elevate her character to the next level, to let her growth sink in, and to add more emotional weight towards latter scenes with her and Polon. In regards to the sidecast, they suffer the most from this issue. Overall, I really enjoyed their personalities and how they function together as part of the Nakano Symphonies. The different ways they contrast or challenge Polon's idealistic mentality is engaging to see, and results in a stronger sense of camaraderie between the group. There are still the tired anime tropes that creep up every now and then. A pretty gross transphobic gag stands out in particular. But as a whole, these set of characters behave in a much more grounded manner than the previous casts. I ended up liking pretty much every character. Yet, despite my enjoyment of the cast, the potential to make these characters compelling beyond how they play off of Polon's ideals unfortunately gets left to the wayside. That's not to say there isn't any depth to them. Some even subverted my expectations on how their characterizations were executed. But when the bulk of the narrative revolves around quests, arcs that primarily spotlight Polon and Momo, then the lack of downtime to explore their nuances make them feel undercooked. While I did ultimately prefer the absence of character roots, the lack of them in this entry further emphasizes the side part of side character, which is a bummer, since there are strong scenes that extrapolate on their depth within the latter half that didn't hit as hard as I wanted them to as a result. The few slice of life scenes that are present in the game encapsulates all the aspects I feel the title lacks beautifully, and shows Anonymous Code's character writing at its best. All the pieces that are here are superbly done, so it's not a lack of quality within what's being presented. Rather, it's a lack of quantity of these types of scenes to knock things out of the park. The true ending in particular, an aspect that every science adventure title nails, feels exceedingly short and half-baked. There's just not enough time to flesh out the different storylines and plot devices introduced, on top of bringing emotional closure to the different characters and their arcs. It just felt like cliff notes rather than full completed scenes. I'm all for shaking things up. I spent a chunk of this review praising the convention's Anonymous Code upended thanks to its faster pacing. As much as I enjoyed the previous entry's utilization of character building via the slice of life scenes, I gotta admit they tend to overstay their welcome. But this latest title trims off too much of the fat for the sake of speeding things along. If every other SciADV game feels 5 hours too long, then Anonymous Code feels 5 hours too short, resulting in the sacrifice of elevating its foundationally strong cast beyond their characterizations during the hacker quests. This is what's so conflicting about Anonymous Code for me. It's overall good, hell, mostly great. I had an absolute blast playing through it in the moment, but the rushed feeling for its character development means it never quite reaches the emotional peaks of previous entries. Thus, by the time the credits rolled, I couldn't help but feel a nagging sense of disappointment. Perhaps it isn't fair to judge a title solely based on what emotions I wanted out of it, rather than appreciating all that it accomplishes. If this were any other game, I would sing its praises despite some of its faults, and leave satisfied. But SciADV is a series that means a lot to me. A series filled with stories and characters that have rocked me to my core numerous times. So when the end result is just solid, it's difficult for me to distance myself from the bias I have towards this franchise when critiquing the missed potential. It's the honest truth of how I feel, even if I'm able to acknowledge all the things the title does well. Nonetheless, I suspect this likely won't be an issue for many people. For fans invested in the lore of the series, Anonymous Code ties together plenty of themes and scientific concepts scattered through the series, all while bringing forth its own compelling ideas to the table. It does make it hard to recommend to people who haven't at least gone through Steins Gate. Though, as someone who has gone through the series, even I have to admit I got giddy at a couple minor and major plot points referencing previous titles. I just wish there could have been more emotional oomph behind it all. Pushing past my personal gripes with the narrative, Anonymous Code fires on all cylinders in terms of its presentation. Almost every aspect of the visuals has some sort of movement to it, whether it's Polon flying through the streets on his bike, or the subtle adjustments on a steering wheel. Character sprites move with subtle expressions or grand gestures, injecting life into the cast much more dynamically than the static portraits of other VNs. It creates a much more lively visual experience. Some of it can look pretty janky, and the lip movements on some characters look incredibly wooden, but I found the jank more charming than distracting. Movement extends to the few CGs as well. Not only are they some of the best in the series, but the extra detail of movements and lip flaps makes the already fantastic art pop even more. Beyond the CGs, new to Anonymous Code are the manga triggers. During action set pieces or visually intensive exposition scenes, everything is presented in a motion manga format. There's no longer a need to have the player visualize events via mountains of narration explaining what the scene looks like. Being able to see everything in motion makes set pieces pop and the scientific exposition dumps much more engaging. I adore this addition and really hope it returns in future entries. In terms of the UI, it sells the futuristic world the game takes place in. Every time the narrative switches perspective, a color-coded startup screen is shown to demonstrate which character the player is following, on top of contextualizing different HUD elements, such as phone call or chat logs, as different apps the characters can see within their vision. Moreover, there are different AR effects within the world that disappear when closing down the HUD elements, including Momo's AR sticker on her cheek. Small touches like these made me appreciate the attention to detail put into constructing this world. It all looks great on the Switch too. While the sprites can look a bit blurry in docked mode, it shines in handheld mode. While there is unfortunately still no touchscreen support, the odd quirks that infested previous SciADV games on Switch are no longer here. Moving the analog stick no longer advances dialogue, and the game doesn't keep running in the background when going to the home menu. There's also support for a singular Joy-Con on its side, which is a minor inclusion, but one I greatly appreciated. Visual novels don't exactly demand a lot of buttons, so being able to play in a casual manner was a treat. The soundtrack is also fantastic, which is to be expected from series veteran composer Takeshi Abo, but he absolutely knocked it out of the park for this entry. Each track sells the atmosphere a scene is going for, and there were a couple of themes that were stuck in my head long after I finished. I'd go as far as to say it's SciADV's best soundtrack. All of this already makes Anonymous Code a stellar production, but the most exciting part, specifically for the localization, is the inclusion of an English dub, a first for the series. Everyone does a fantastic job in their roles, and Max Middleton kills it as Polon, perfectly capturing his youthful optimism and fiery determination. The standout to me was Wai Chang as Polon's best friend, Cross. He perfectly captures the straight man to Polon's heroic idealism, both unafraid to call out our protagonist whenever he proposes a reckless action, yet also willing to listen and be endlessly supportive towards his friend. In short, if no one's got my back, I'll at least know my pal Cross got my back. While I'm not well informed enough to speak on their localization quality, most people from what I've seen are satisfied with it. At the very least, Anonymous Code's script sounds significantly less stiff in comparison to previous entries. Ultimately, I did really enjoy Anonymous Code. In many ways, it reminds me of the first title in the series, Chaos Head. That game had plenty of flaws, but it served as a blueprint for how future entries were constructed, as the wrinkles in the formula were smoothed out. Anonymous Code feels like it's setting its own blueprint for the future of the series. From a production standpoint, it's the best the series has to offer with an engaging visual style, stellar soundtrack, and fantastic dub. The efficiency of its narrative beats and character writing lends well to its faster pacing. The save and load progression system is the most streamlined form of player interaction yet. How the narrative weaves said system with its story and characters creates a compelling thematic dive about our place in a vast unknown future. Unfortunately, the breakneck pace of the story sacrifices giving time to flesh out characters in favor of rushing towards the next conflict, thus leaving scenes during the latter half to lack the strong emotional resonance that made the series so impactful for me. It's this singular issue that left me conflicted with the whole package, having me focus on what it could have been rather than what it is. Maybe I'll learn to appreciate Anonymous Code in the future with a few more entries, seeing the formula fully blossom with the kinks ironed out, to learn to love it upon reflection as a fiction that paved the way for SciADV's future, akin to Chaos Head. However, only time will tell. As of right now, Anonymous Code is a great game that I liked a lot. I just wish I was able to love and resonate with it, like with the titles that came before.